What's going on, everybody? It's your sweet Papa Yam here, back at it once again. I thought it'd be fun to do a review as comprehensive as I can about this, the 2017 Yamaha FZ-07 that I'm currently riding. In case you don't know, this is our giveaway motorcycle, so there's a bit of a backstory about how I sort of got this bike and am riding it right now. So I guess we'll talk about that. I didn't necessarily choose this motorcycle, not to say that I don't love the FZ-07, I think it's an awesome bike, but it was actually chosen by the patrons over on our Patreon page. They wanted to see this bike in the video and they think it's a cool bike and they voted on it. And this was the one that got the most votes to be our next giveaway motorcycle. So I went out and bought it. I have actually owned a Yamaha R3 and an FZ-09. And I feel like this motorcycle is kind of between those two bikes in a lot of ways. Being that it is a parallel twin, it's a 270-degree crank, so it sounds a little bit different than most parallel twins. It's not as big of an engine as the FZ-09. The FZ-09 has an 847cc triple. This has a 689cc parallel twin versus the R3's 321cc parallel twin. But a lot of the way that it behaves reminds me of the R3, and a lot of the way that it behaves reminds me of the FZ-09. So specs on this motorcycle. This is a 2017 model, as I mentioned. It had 7,300 miles on it when I bought it. It's got about 7,900 miles on it right now, so I've put on about 600 miles on it in the time that I've owned it. I've owned it for about like a month and a half now. So before I owned the FZ-07, I kind of thought of it like a lesser version of the FZ-09. I'd only ever ridden one of these bikes and it didn't have a full exhaust on it, which I'm going to mention later in the video because that I think is a very important part of the FZ-07 experience. So I'd only ever ridden one before. I thought it was okay. I was like, well, this feels like an FZ-09, but it's just not as pokey and grunty, so what's the point, right? But the more I kind of ride it and the more I kind of get with it, I think there's really a case to be made for a bike with, you know, between 80 to 100 horsepower for the street, because it is just so accessible. That's what I think the takeaway is for the FZ-07, is how accessible the performance is, especially if you're a bit more of an experienced motorcyclist. If you're a beginner rider, you're gonna think this thing's a rocket ship, I guarantee you. But if you're a little bit more experienced with bikes, you'll jump on this thing and you'll be amazed at how you can just wring its neck and, you know, really not be doing triple-digit speeds or anything like that, you know? Like I myself, you can romp this thing through all the way through third gear, you're not gonna be getting in too much trouble, you know? Like I look down and I think I'm going a lot faster than I actually am with this thing, and, you know, usually doing only about 50 or 60 miles per hour, which makes it really fun. It's a really fun motorcycle. So as I mentioned, my experience with bikes constitutes, I've owned quite a few vehicles, but my two main experiences were with the Triumph Daytona 675R and the Yamaha FZ-09. So I'm used to bikes that have between 115 and 125-ish horsepower, you know, very torquey in the case of the FZ-09, and a good amount of torque in the 675R versus like your traditional 600s, but this thing continuously surprises me. I thought that by jumping on this thing, I was like, oh, it's gonna be, you know, kind of slow versus those other motorcycles. It's not gonna be as fun, but I would be hard pressed to put any motorcyclist on this bike, have them ride around town and tell me they did not have an absolute blast with this thing. It is one of the most fun bikes I've ever owned. And I honestly think it's more fun than my FZ-09 because I don't feel like it's gonna get me into that much trouble. As I mentioned, it's a bike you can really explore and enjoy, which makes it really fun. It has this really fun nature to it. So around the town, that's where I think, you know, 95% of FZ-07 ownership life is gonna occur, is usually, you know, kind of bopping around town, running errands, going to places, doing stuff like that. It is one of the best bikes to just kind of bop around town with. It's upright enough to where you're not gonna be hurting your back on a long ride, but it's also sporty enough to where you can definitely have some fun if you know, the going gets a little bit more curvy. Is it the best kind of, you know, twisties motorcycle ever? Certainly not, and we'll get into that a little bit later as well. But It's, you know, for around the town riding, it's pretty hard to beat the FZ-07. Even compared to something like a Super Motard, or like, I would pit this thing against any naked bike that's currently out right now, and it'll probably beat it. It's got this really just kind of effervescent character to it. It's mated to this extremely light chassis, this lightweight body. It's a light motorcycle overall. I think it weighs under 400 pounds, and you really feel it when you're riding it around. It feels like it has nothing on it. We have another motorcycle we're working with, the CB900F Honda. It's a 2006, our Hentai Hornet. I've ridden it around a couple times, and that thing just feels like a pig, dude. That thing is, I think, like 480 pounds, something like that. It's a big bike. It feels massive when you're riding it. But the FZ-07 here just feels like a little featherweight when you're cruising around town with it. So around the town performance, I would rate it as very fun. The emotional performance of it, as Lemmy from Revzilla would say, is pretty high. Where I think the poor little FZ falls short a little bit is on twistier roads and on more fun, kind of spirited riding. It's not to say that it's not a capable motorcycle. It's just, if you are used to more sportier bikes, like I'm used to a Daytona 675R, I've ridden several liter bikes, this thing is gonna disappoint you a little bit in a couple ways, right? So the engine, when you're around town, you're like, wow, it's this really torquey, fun motor, but once you actually kind of get it up in the rev range, you realize that it just kind of plateaus a little bit. It doesn't build in power as you would kind of expect it to. But you know, it's extremely accessible, right? When you're out there kind of carving up those twisty roads, you can really go wide open throttle at those apexes and not really be too concerned. The problem is the rest of the motorcycle kind of falls apart a little bit when you do that. So even though the engine is very willing and capable to rev out, is it going to be a superstar performer? No, not really, but you can definitely just wick the throttle and power out of a corner. But all of a sudden, the suspension starts to feel a little bit more budget. The entire experience of the motorcycle starts to not really gel together as it did when you're around the town. For example, the cutout here for your knees don't really, you can't ever really get comfortable in a more aggressive position with it. You can't really find a good kind of way to wrestle it around corners because the suspension is a little bit too soft, it's non-adjustable. So I wouldn't go so far as to say it's frustrating on a twisty road. It just, if you are an experienced motorcyclist, it does leave a little bit to be desired for when you are kind of, you know, using it for that. But I am of the opinion that a good motorcyclist kind of works with what they have and is much more about the experience and much more willing to work with the tools they are given rather than trying to use some, you know, bike with full Olin suspension on the street. So you can certainly ride this thing and have a super fun time. I want to put that out there. I think my experience and my expectations with motorcycles lends me to approach this bike to be like, well, it could use this and it could use that. Like the first thing I thought of when I pitched it into a corner, I was like, it needs suspension. I was like, it needs stiffer suspension at the front because I cannot pitch it into a corner correctly and feel confident that it's going to lean over correctly. And anytime a bump also happens, it just kind of does a little bit one of those wobbles. It's not as bad as the FZ-09 suspension. Oh my God, my FZ-09 suspension was comically bad in twisties. It would do one of these when the going got a little bit twisty. But that bike had so much power it didn't matter. It was like an old school muscle car or something. But yeah, that's so for more aggressive kind of riding, the FZ-07 would definitely need a couple tweaks to make it as good as it could be. Something I wanted to do as well for this video was to do a quick ergonomics check so you guys could see. I find the ergonomics on this bike to be perfect for me. I am 6 foot tall, about 180 pounds or so. And I find that, you know, I can super easily flat foot this motorcycle. I have complete control of it. I actually have a bend in my legs when I flat foot it. I could actually, you know, very easily flat foot this bike. I have complete control over it when I'm handling it around. I think that riders, you know, I would say someone even as short as like 5'4" could probably very comfortably ride this bike. You might be a little bit on your toes right here, but it's super manageable. This one has aftermarket bars, so I'm not sure about how far pitched forward the stock one is, but this is an extremely neutral position right here. You can see the pegs are pretty low down. You're not going to be super high up or anything like on a sport bike. This is a very much a street-oriented naked motorcycle that's designed to be used in a variety of applications. So as you can see here, it's a pretty standard position. I find it to be extremely comfortable. I could literally ride this bike all day long without getting tired of it. So it's a quick little ergonomics check on the FZ-07. I think one thing you have to talk about with this bike is the exhaust and the sound that it makes. Personally, I'm not a huge, like, you know, you have to get a full system on every bike you buy, you know, kind of like a Royal Jordanian type that every motorcycle has to have, you know, a full Akrapovic exhaust system, but holy crap, this bike completely changes when you pull a full system on it. To be honest, when I rode it around with the stock system, I was like, oh, this is a, you know, fun little bike, have a good time with it. It completely changes the experience of this motorcycle when you put a full system on this thing. If you are looking to get an FZ-07, you have to get an exhaust for it. It's not like, oh, like it would be a good idea for you to get, no, you must get an exhaust for this motorcycle. There is no question about it. Completely changes the character of it. It sounds absolutely amazing. This bike has no right to sound this good for the price that it costs out the door, you know, compared to other new bikes. It sounds amazing. It sounds absolutely amazing. I've had several people compliment me on the sound of it. I've had people ask me if it's a Ducati several times in traffic. I guess just because of the way it's red and has this exhaust system, but you know, I guess those normies don't see the big tuning fork brand right there. It's kind of funny. And so, yeah, I would say that's just one note I wanted to make about this bike is you have got to get a full system on it. It sounds gorgeous. So, yeah. So yeah, overall impressions, this is a fantastic motorcycle. I don't want you guys to get the wrong idea and think that I don't think this is a great bike. This is a great bike. Anyone who, even like for beginners, it's a great bike. For experienced motorcyclists, they can swing a leg over this thing, have a great time. It's a bit of a jack of all trades bike. I love that, you know, the aftermarket support for this bike is massive. You can do so many cool things to this motorcycle. You can adapt it to any kind of needs that you might want with it. It's super cool for that reason. I think if you're looking for a twisties kind of canyon carving motorcycle, this is not the best option, but that isn't to say that you couldn't make this into a very capable motorcycle. And if you really like the platform and you want like a do everything sort of bike, you could do much worse than the FZ-07. It's a great bike for that. I think for the price of entry, this is a fantastic motorcycle. I've had a blast with this thing so far. I think the sound it makes is super neat. It's just a great bike. A couple things, you know, as I mentioned, a couple things I would change would be, you know, I wish it would be super cool if Yamaha offered some sort of like, you know, up-spec version of this motorcycle. I understand why they don't, right? It's not a flagship model, so they're not going to offer different variants of the FZ-07. They only offer like the XSR 700, which is a neo-retro version of this bike, but it would be cool if they offered like an FZ-07S or something that had adjustable front forks, maybe an FZ-07R, right? Which they may do, right? Because Aprilia is doing their RS660, I believe it's what it's called. Like the parallel twin lightweight super sports class may be coming back, so Yamaha might jump back into the fold. They got a perfect engine to do it with it right here. They could up-spec this a little bit, make it rev out a little bit harder, make that around 100 horsepower or so, and create a bit of a track weapon. People are already doing that a bunch. I know that the FZ-07 is super popular to turn into a bit of a track day special. I know guys that do full fairing kits on these as well. So again, it's super modular. You can do a ton with it, and I think it's an awesome bike. What do you guys think? What do you guys think of this motorcycle? Let me know in the comments below. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. See you later.